Mike Ehrmantraut is probably one of the most experienced and careful criminals we've ever seen on screen. But the real question is, could someone like him actually survive the real DEA? Well, I love Mike, and today we will be comparing him from the DEA of 2008, looking at his counter-surveillance skills and his strict rules for doing business, and answering one question. Would his background as a former cop keep him out of prison, or would he end up in handcuffs? And we're starting with tactical intelligence versus digital forensics. So when the DEA starts building a profile on a suspect, the first thing they do is run their name through federal databases like the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC. Now they look for past arrests, known associates, and gang affiliations. My neighbor Phil is on this list, but Mike has a completely clean criminal record. He has never been arrested, so he doesn't exist in any records or cartel watch lists. To a DEA intelligence analyst running a basic background check, Mike is quite literally just an old grandpa living paycheck to paycheck. He also completely beats the DEA's psychological profiling. Federal agents catch people because criminals are inherently greedy and selfish. They profile for erratic behavior and sudden betrayals. But Mike, he operates on a strict, unbreakable code of discipline. We see the perfect example of this in Better Call Saul when Jimmy hires him to steal $1.6 million from the Kettlemans. Any normal street enforcer would have grabbed that duffel bag of cash and disappeared across the border to Mexico. But Mike didn't take a dime for himself. He did exactly what he was hired to do and handed the money over. When Jimmy points out that there was over $1.5 million in the bag and he could have easily run off to the Bahamas, Mike simply replies with, "Thanks for not heading to the Bahamas with this." Am I correct in assuming we're now square? Square. He never goes out of his way to harm an employer, and you simply can't set a trap for a guy who doesn't care about getting rich. But y'all, Mike isn't a robot, and his intelligence has one massive blind spot: his emotions. Mike actually cares about the people he works with. He goes out of his way to protect Nacho, and he completely refuses to let Lydia Rodark Coyle kill his men when they're locked up in jail. When Lydia meets him at a diner and slides a hit list of his 11 guys across the table, Mike slides it right back to her. "These are my guys and they are solid." On TV, this makes him a loyal and compelling character. But in the real world, the DEA loves a guy who takes half measures to protect his crew. Federal prosecutors use grand juries and RICO charges to target the weakest links around a target. If Mike refuses to cut his guys loose, the DEA doesn't even need to catch Mike directly. They just have to wait for one of his younger, sloppier guys to make a mistake, arrest them, and use the threat of a 20-year sentence to force them to testify against him. This brings us to the biggest mismatch of all, the technology gap. Now Mike, he's an incredibly smart analog guy living in a digital world. When he gathers intelligence, he uses binoculars, pulls physical library records, or sits in his car all night. He uses burner phones and snaps them in half, thinking that keeps him completely safe. But y'all, the DEA in the late 2000s weren't just listening to phone calls anymore. They were tracking metadata. Federal agencies started heavily using devices called cell site simulators, commonly known as stingrays. These devices trick nearby cell phones into connecting to them instead of a regular cell tower. By doing this, the DEA can pinpoint exact locations, download contacts, and map out entire criminal networks without the suspect ever actually making a single phone call. This is exactly how the FBI and the DEA took down old school bosses in the Chicago outfit and Italian mafia during the 2000s. The older bosses were incredibly careful on the phone and swept their cars for physical bugs just like Mike. But the feds mapped their entire operations anyway by tracking the digital footprints of the younger associates that they kept around them. Now Mike, he might snap his burner phone in half, but if he calls an associate who keeps their smartphone turned on in their pocket, the DEA already has a digital map, drawing a line straight back to Mike. His tactical intelligence is unmatched on the physical street, but a 1980s cop brain simply can't outsmart a federal agency armed with modern signals, intelligence, and metadata tracking. Winner: DEA counterintelligence versus DEA field operations. Now Mikey, he spent decades working as a police officer in Philadelphia. He was also a Vietnam sniper, and he knows exactly how law enforcement operates. He understands how detectives think, how they set up a stakeout, and exactly how they follow a suspect. This gives them a massive advantage right out of the gate. When the DEA tries to build a case against a high-level target, they rely heavily on physical surveillance. They don't just put one car behind you, they use what's called a floating box method. This involves 3 to 5 unmarked cars communicating over the radio, constantly taking turns following the suspect, so the target never sees the same car in the rearview mirror twice. They also combine this with aviation support, using helicopters or small planes to track the suspect from the sky where they can't be seen. The goal is to map out the target's entire routine, where they eat, who they meet, and where they hide their cash. But Mike knows all of these tricks. When the DEA puts a full surveillance team on him in Breaking Bad, he doesn't panic. And he definitely doesn't try to speed off to lose them. He just completely strips them of their power by being extremely boring. He just sits at a park with his granddaughter Kay, completely unbothered, while Agent Gomez and Van Oster watch him from a distance. Mike notices the surveillance immediately and decides to play a small, clever trick. Before leaving the park, he scribbles a note and tucks it under a nearby trash can. Gomez thinks it's a dead drop, and he approaches the spot expecting to find a secret handoff, but he only finds a note which simply reads. Mike uses the note to silently mock them, but from a tactical standpoint, this is a brilliant move. In the real world, the moment the surveillance team realizes the target knows they are there, the operation is completely burned. The DEA has to pack up and pull back, because the target is never going to do anything illegal while they're watching federal surveillance operations. They're incredibly expensive, costing thousands of dollars a day to keep agents, vehicles, and airport on a single target. The government, surprisingly, simply doesn't have the budget to watch a man sit on a park bench for 6 months straight, and since following someone manually is difficult, expensive, and takes a lot of manpower, the DEA in '08 heavily relied on GPS trackers. They would get a warrant, sneak into a suspect's driveway in the middle of the night, and attach a battery-operated device to the underside of a car to monitor movements remotely. But y'all, Mike treats his vehicle like a crime scene. Checking for these devices is a regular part of his routine. And better call Saul when he suspects someone is tracking him after he robs Hector's truck. He takes his station wagon to a junkyard and dismantles the whole thing piece by piece. He checks the chassis, the interior, and the wiring until he finally discovers a small battery-operated tracker hidden deep inside his gas cap. Instead of just destroying the bug or leaving the car behind, however, Mike completely reverses the situation. He buys an identical tracker and learns exactly how the technology works. He figures out that the device sends a specific signal whenever the battery is running low. So using this knowledge, he hooks the original tracker to a handheld radio to intentionally drain its battery, making it appear almost dead to the people tracking him. At the same time, he secretly installs his new fully charged tracker in the gas cap. He stays awake all night watching his car. And in the early morning, a man finally arrives to replace the supposedly failing tracker with a fresh one. What he doesn't know is that the device he took is now Mike's. Once the man drives off, Mike simply activates his receiver and follows the signal, tracking the man step by step back to the source. So, in the real world, this level of counter-surveillance is a nightmare for federal agents. If the DEA managed to plant a tracker on Mike's car, he would almost certainly find it and use it to figure out exactly who was watching him and from where. The real DEA, they rely on suspects getting careless. They wait for a suspect to meet with the wrong person in public or ignore the signs that they are being watched. But y'all, Mike never gets careless. He plays the exact same game that the DEA plays, just better. He completely drains their operational budget and turns their own technology against them until they have no choice but to back off. Winner, Mike. Grandpa cover versus financial profiling. Now, when the DEA gets tipped about a major drug operation, they start by looking at people who would have connections to the drugs. That includes enforcers, distributors, and suppliers. But to actually catch them, federal agencies like the DEA and the IRS use what they call lifestyle audits. They actively look for suspects who have unexplained wealth. If a guy claims to work a minimum wage job but drives a brand new luxury car, buys a massive house in cash, and wears expensive watches, that instantly puts a target on his back. Criminals usually get caught because their egos won't let them hide their money. But Mike, he's entirely immune to this strategy, because while he initially worked as a parking booth attendant to stay completely under the radar, he later upgraded his cover to something bulletproof. Under Gus Fring, Mike became a legitimate W-2 employee working as a corporate security consultant for Magical Electromotive, a massive multinational conglomerate. To the IRS and the DEA, he had a high-paying documented corporate job that perfectly justified his comfortable middle-class existence. Despite making huge amounts of illicit cash with Gus, and later pulling in millions of dollars working with Walter Mike, he never bought luxury rides or expensive mansions. To the outside world, he looks exactly like a retired older man living on a fixed pension. And more importantly, he actually lives like one. Plus, Mike, he don't care about getting rich for his own benefit. He only needs the money to help support his daughter-in-law, Stacy, and his granddaughter, Kay. We see exactly how disciplined he is with the cash early on in Better Call Saul. After he sets up Tuco Salamanca to get arrested, he walks away with a broken face and $25,000 in pure cash. For most low-level criminals, a sudden $25K payday means a loud celebration, which is exactly what the DEA looks for to open investigations. But Mike, he just goes back to his boring, mundane lifestyle. But guys, this extreme financial discipline shows up again a few days later when Hector Salamanca threatens his granddaughter. Mike agrees to take the fall for Tuco's gun, but demands $50,000 as payout. I got my money or neither of us walk out of here. Maybe I need the $50,000 more than you do. On the surface, it looks like Hector won. But Mike simply took the money and quietly funneled it into his family's life without drawing a single ounce of attention to himself. But $50,000 is pocket change compared to what came later. When Mike was running Gus's security empire and later moving millions with Walt's meth operation, his financial footprint should have exploded. In the real world, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, they monitor large cash deposits, sudden spikes in spending, and wire transfers. A guy pulling in millions of dollars in drug money usually slips up by buying a sports car in cash or paying off a mortgage overnight. To the DEA in 2008, a criminal who refuses to spend money on himself is almost impossible to catch through basic financial profiling. Law enforcement relies heavily on the fact that criminals want to enjoy the money that they make. They want the status that comes with it, and Mike has absolutely zero ego in that department. He never upgrades his lifestyle. He never gives the Financial Crimes Division a single reason to look at his bank accounts or run a background check in the first place. He beats their profiling system by simply refusing to play the game. Winner, Michael. But if the DEA can't catch you on surveillance and they can't catch you spending dirty money, their next step is always the same. They find an informant. Operational security versus DEA informants. When the DEA wants to bring down a major organization, they rarely start at the top. The DEA's entire playbook, it revolves around finding the weakest link, applying extreme legal pressure, and then forcing them to talk. In the real world, federal agents, they will pull an associate into an interrogation room and offer them what's called a pro-fur session or a queen for a day agreement. And the deal is simple. Tell us everything you know about the boss, and we file a motion to reduce your sentence. Keep your mouth shut, and you will die in a federal penitentiary. And we saw this exact strategy destroy the American mafia in the 90s and 2000s. Bosses who demanded absolute loyalty ended up in prison because their own underbosses flipped to save themselves. This is exactly where Mike is the most vulnerable. Unlike Gus Fring or Walter White, Mike's not a ruthless killer. He actually has a heart, and he hates taking lives unless it is absolutely necessary. While this makes him a great person in the criminal underworld, emotional hesitation, it leaves a massive opening for the DEA. Even when Mike has to commit a crime out in the open, his strategy, it revolves around extreme care and avoiding unnecessary death. When he robs Hector's truck in the desert, he doesn't leave a chaotic mess. And more importantly, he doesn't just shoot the driver. He uses a homemade spike strip, calmly ties the driver up, and uses an electric saw to cut the money out of the tires. Guys, he executes a perfect robbery while intentionally leaving the driver completely unharmed. But in the real world, leaving a witness alive is a massive liability. If the DEA had found that driver before the cartel did, they would have immediately offered him witness protection in exchange for a physical description and operational details about the man who robbed him. Then, when it comes to his own people, Mike is even softer. He's fiercely loyal and expects the same loyalty in return. We see this clearly when Gus orders him to kill Vera Ziegler. Mike desperately tries to find another way and practically begs Gus to let Vera live, but he ultimately has to pull the trigger. And since Mike hates killing, he refuses to eliminate his guys when they become a liability. We see this perfectly after Gus Fring dies. The DEA freezes Gus's assets, leaving Mike's 9 former enforcers sitting in federal custody without their hazard pay. Walter White and Lydia both suggest murdering the men to keep them quiet, but Mike completely refuses. These are my guys, and they are solid. In the real world, the DEA relies entirely on this exact hesitation. Federal prosecutors use a tactic called the prisoner's dilemma. They'd isolate all 9 men in different holding cells so that they couldn't communicate. Then they approach each one individually and say, the first guy to sign this plea deal gets 5 years. Everyone else gets 25. And Mike's belief that his guys will stay solid is pure fiction. In real life, federal cases from the fall of the Gulf Cartel to massive modern gang indictments, Nobody stays solid when facing 25 years in a concrete box while their family goes bankrupt. By refusing to eliminate his crew, Mike gives the DEA the exact human leverage they need to flip his people, map out his network, and draft his arrest warrant. So, the winner, DEA. Forensic cleanliness versus the crime lab. When the DEA or local police walk into a crime scene, they're not just looking for obvious clues. By 08, forensic science was incredibly advanced, guys. The DEA worked closely with federal crime labs to pull trace evidence from almost anywhere. In the real world, forensic teams use chemical sprays like luminol to reveal blood that was bleached and wiped away. They pull microscopic touch DNA off door handles and run prints through the AFIS database in minutes. Taking down a cartel enforcer usually comes down to a single stray hair in a getaway car or a matching shell casing left at the scene. But Mike Trout isn't a careless street enforcer, now is he, guys? He spent years as a police officer in Philadelphia, so he knows exactly how a crime lab operates and what investigators are trained to look for. He leverages this information to create a narrative so the police can never even suspect a major crime happened. We see his deep understanding of crime scene staging perfectly when he shows up to clean Jesse's apartment after Jane's tragic overdose. Mike steps through the door and immediately takes control. He systematically removes all of the drugs, the cash, and anything else that could connect her to Jesse or Walt's larger operation. He even checks Jesse's arms and tells him to wear long sleeves to cover his track marks. Mike knows exactly what the police and paramedics will ask, so he gives Jesse his exact script, leaving zero room for interpretation. Here's your story. You woke up, you found her, that's all you know. Say it. Mike understands that if the scene looks exactly like a standard tragic overdose, the police will just process the body and close the case. They won't bring in a federal forensic team to dust for fingerprints or run DNA swabs because there is no foul play to investigate. We see this exact masterclass in staging a scene when he has to cover up Howard Hamlin's murder. To keep the popo from treating it as a cartel hit, Mike don't just bury the body, he crafts an entire fake story. He removes Howard's wedding ring and wallet to prevent identification, and later stages Howard's car several states away next to the ocean. Also, we never get to see the ocean in the Breaking Bad universe. So, the fact that we finally get to see it, and it was kind of sad. But anyway, by leaving cocaine in the car and making it look like a suicide by drowning, he gives the authorities a neat wrapped-up tragedy that stops them from ever looking for a crime scene in Albuquerque. What makes Mike even more dangerous is that he doesn't just hide from forensic science, he weaponizes it against his enemies. When he wants to disrupt Hector Salamaca's supply lines without bringing the wrath of the entire cartel down on himself, he uses the authorities to do his dirty work. He gets a small amount of cocaine, hides it inside a pair of sneakers, and hangs them over a power line above the road. When Hector's truck drives underneath, Mike uses a POW sniper rifle to shoot the shoes, dropping the powder right onto the truck's roof. One of my favorite schemes. He knows that border checkpoints are using drug-sniffing doggies and chemical swabs that will instantly flag the residue, and his plan works perfectly. The dogs alert the guards. The authorities conduct a full search, finding the hidden compartments, and the truck drivers are arrested. The real DEA relies on suspects making a mistake in the heat of the moment. They wait for someone to panic and leave a bloody footprint or drop a piece of evidence. Modern forensics can catch almost anyone, but they still need a starting point. And since Mike knows the police playbook inside and out, he simply never gives the crime lab anything to work with, and he uses their own forensic checkpoints to destroy his rivals. Winner, Mike. Interrogation resistance and legal strategy. When the DEA finally gets a suspect into an interrogation room, they give them milk and cookies. Not really. I wish they did. But they use highly structured psychological tactics to break the person down. They often present a mix of real evidence and bluffs, hoping the suspect will panic and try to explain themselves. In the real world, many criminals end up accidentally confessing or revealing too much because they think they can outsmart the detectives. But Mike used to be the guy sitting on the other side of that table. Because of his decades as a police officer in Philly, he knows every single interrogation technique the DEA uses before they even open their mouths. He knows that talking never helps, and silence is the only real defense. We see him use this exact defense mechanism early on in Better Call Saul. When two detectives from his old town in Philly come to ABQ to question him about the two corrupt cops who were murdered, Mike gives them absolutely nothing. He brings his lawyer, Jimmy McHill, and sits through the interview with a completely blank expression. When the detectives try to pressure him by saying his story doesn't add up, he doesn't try to defend himself or invent a new lie. He just lets Jimmy do the talking and politely ends the conversation. He understands that detectives cannot arrest you based on suspicion alone. We see him apply this same strategy against federal agents after Gus Fring is killed. The authorities are scrambling to take down Gus's remaining network, and Mike's name comes up because of the offshore bank accounts Gus used to pay his people. Mike is called into the DEA Albuquerque field office for a formal interview with Hank and Gomez. Hank, he immediately starts with a classic interrogation tactic, belittling the suspect to make them defensive. He mocks Mike's cover story as a corporate security consultant for Los Pus Manos, hoping Mike's ego will force him to talk. I mean, given your history, doing background checks on pimple-faced fry cooks seems like overkill. What else you do for Frank? When a normal criminal hears this, they might try and puff up their chest and try to justify their job or over-explain their innocence, which gives the DEA exactly what they want, a baseline of how the suspect acts when they are lying. But Mike gives them absolutely nothing and just plays completely dumb. Drug empire, first I'm hearing about that. When that doesn't work, Mike completely flips the power dynamic in the room. He knows the law inside and out. He knows the DEA is only talking to him because they don't have enough hard evidence to actually charge him yet. So instead of answering more questions, he lays his hands flat on the table, completely relaxed, and calls their bluff. Forget your handcuffs. I'm confused. Am I under arrest here or am I not? You are not under arrest currently. Mike stands up to walk out, proving that the psychological pressure of the room don't affect him at all. But when standard tactics fail, the real DEA will shift its focus to the one thing criminals care about most, their illicit assets. Federal agents know that while they can't legally threaten innocent family members, they can absolutely seize dirty money left in their names. Hoping the emotional and financial blow will force a confession, Hank stops Mike at the door by bringing up the $2 million sitting in an offshore account for his granddaughter, Kay. Anyway, one of the names was Mike Ehrmantraut, 10 years old and just cute as button. $2 million in change we found on deposit. Her dear old granddad. Gomez immediately follows up with the good cop routine. He offers a fake lifeline, suggesting that the government might allow Kay to keep some of that money in her name if Mike cooperates and tells them everything he knows about Gus's operation. This is a textbook real-world tactic, guys. The detectives create a massive problem and then immediately offer themselves as the only solution, hoping the emotional shock will make the suspect crack. But Mike, he don't flinch. He knows that if he admits the money is his, he admits to the crimes and the DEA will take the money anyway. Showing any sign of weakness or hesitation would give Hank and Gomez a reason to keep pushing. So Mike looks at them completely stone-faced and denies reality. I don't know anything about any money. I don't know what you're talking about. He walks out of the field office without giving them a single usable sentence. The DEA, the real one, relies on fear, ego, and emotional leverage to close their cases. But since Mike has no ego and knows the exact legal boundaries, he's completely immune to their psychological pressure. Winner. The W goes to Grandpa Mike, the money trail and legacy. But my friends, every criminal has a weak point. And for Mike, it isn't his ego or his temper. It's his family. Mike's entire reason for being in the game is to leave money for his granddaughter, Kaylee. He needs to make sure she is taken care of after he's gone. But in the real world, the DEA knows that millions of dollars in drug money is completely useless if you can't actually put it in a bank account or spend it. The federal government has entire financial divisions dedicated to tracking the flow of dirty money. Banks are legally required to report suspicious activity, especially large structured cash deposits. And since Mike can't just hand bags of cash to his family directly without triggering a massive IRS audit, and I don't think Bitcoin was invented yet, he's forced to use the financial system. In the show, he relies on Gus's offshore accounts, and later, he hires his lawyer, Don Washburger, to manually deposit cash into a series of safety deposit boxes. This is exactly where the real DEA wins, though. The federal government has entire divisions dedicated strictly to tracking the flow of dirty money. They have nothing better to do. By 2008, laws like the Bank Secrecy Act forced banks to automatically report any cash transaction over $10,000. The system also aggressively flags structuring, which is when someone tries to break up large amounts of cash into smaller deposits to stay under that limit. Financial investigators use massive databases like FinanCEN, which I mentioned earlier, to track these exact patterns. They don't need to put a GPS tracker on your car or catch you in a lie, if they can just track your bank deposits. To move his money safely, Mike has to trust white-collar intermediaries like his lawyer. And the real DEA loves targeting lawyers, bankers, and accountants. This is exactly how the DEA brought down the massive Cali cartel in the 90s. They won by targeting the cartel's chief accountant, GMO Palamari, and forcing them to hand over the financial records. And guys like Dan Washburger aren't hardened street enforcers. They wear suits and work in comfortable offices. They don't have Mike's discipline, and they definitely don't have his loyalty. When the DEA's Financial Crimes Division catches him moving dirty money, they don't even need to use psychological tricks in the interrogating room. They simply show the lawyer the paper trail, explain how many decades they'll spend in federal prison under money laundering statutes, and the lawyer cooperates instantly to save themselves. This is exactly what happens in the show when Dan Washburger gets caught at the bank and immediately gives up Mike to save his own skin. Bro is not Saul. Now Mike, though, he's a complete ghost on the streets. He knows exactly how to beat the police, the surveillance teams, and the crime labs, but he can't beat the American banking system. Even the Joker's scared of the IRS. Mike's need to leave money behind is the one thing that forces him to trust other people. And the real-life DEA relies on that exact financial paper trail to bring down operators who are otherwise untouchable. Winner, DEA. Now guys, let me be honest. This is just what I think. Mike might be a tactical genius, but the financial system is built exactly to catch what he was trying to do. So, drop a comment down below if you think Mike could have actually found a way to clean his money and outsmart the DEA's financial division. And if you enjoyed this video, check out our other video right here. I think you will like it. It's a banger. I will be there too, and I hope to see you there as well. But thanks for watching, commenting, and have a good one. Bye-bye.